PNC Bank brings you Call of the Wild Money Moves. You hear that?
YOLO!
That's an internet troll.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. We have quite a bit of information coming out today. We have maybe a peace agreement between the United States and Iran, and not only that, that Russia actually launched a nuclear drill today, and fired ballistic missiles, and so forth. We have quite a bit to go over today. If you don't want to miss today, it is quite a show today. We like I said, we have a lot to go over, so we're not gonna mess around with this today. We have quite many videos that we have of Russia launching missiles and nuclear capable missiles and ICBMs, using their strategic air force as well as using land-based ICBMs. Also using sea to air ICBMs from sea. So like I said, we have a lot to go over. You don't want to miss today. It is quite a wait 1 second. Let me why is it not coming up? There it goes. All right, so but anyways, we couldn't get it to come up, y'all. Apologize. We actually have video of this, which is about to come up on the screen here in momentarily. We actually have footage of Russia launching their let me fix this real quick. I'm sorry, that's weird. Actually firing their ICBMs and their nuclear capable missiles and stuff. So, further ado, let's get to the news. 1 second, we are having. All right, I apologize, y'all. go ahead and turn this down a little bit. That is actually, these are jets that's actually capable of actually striking deep into well, anywhere in the world. We also have
Внимание, расчет, получен приказ на проведение пуска ракет. Приготовиться к совместным действиям.
Есть. Набор уверен, к совместным действиям готов.
Внимание, расчет, пуск.
Есть.
Второе, проконтролирует прохождение пусковых операций.
Есть пусковая ситуация. Получено технологическое донесение, пуск начался.
Принял.
Есть технологическое донесение, спусковой установки, пуск состоялся.
Принял.
Now it says here Russia is conducting launches of intercontinental hypersonic and air-launched cruise missiles during the second phase of its strategic nuclear forces exercises. A nuclear-powered submarine conducted a submerged launch of an R-29 RMUT Zeneva submarine launched ballistic missile, which is SLBM. The frigate Admiral Gorskowski or Gorskova, an Admiral Gorskova class project 22350 guided missile frigate launches a 3M22 Zarkan hypersonic missile from the Barents Sea. Now these are missiles that are capable to launch anywhere in the world. If they work, should I say? Because we see how well Russia's military, and not only military, but equipment uses, and how it actually, well, they're crap. They really are. We see how the air defense systems are working against Ukraine right now, which is terrible. Really terrible. Really got I did log out. But anyways, yeah, we have several defensive measures to actually deflect nuclear, but not enough. Nowhere near enough. It's insane. But what you doing? Well, but anyways, let's get to the news.
Back to day 1548 of the War News stream, and tonight we have more large news yet again. Right now, we're seeing that Russia is currently under a large-scale drone assault, including Moscow yet again. We're currently getting the initial videos of it, but it is ongoing as we're streaming right now. We're also seeing that Ukraine's preparing a preemptive strike on Belarus, apparently, according to Zelensky, and that's a pretty big one as well. And also, another very big story, Putin is now forward deploying active nuclear warheads to Belarus in an unprecedented move. And we have a lot of news also out of Iran too, but mainly out of Russia and Ukraine. But it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of the news from around the world, as we have been able to hear of significant developments today within the war in Ukraine in particular, and also from around the rest of the world. world, also including the Middle East. We have been able to hear, as of this moment right now, that significant drone attacks with around 300 Ukrainian drones involved at this moment are being conducted within the Russian Federation. So far, significant hits have been seen within major cities throughout the country, specifically around the area of the Volga River, while simultaneously, a large number of Ukrainian drones have also been spotted and identified around the Moscow air defense perimeter on its very outskirts. This comes at the very moment in time that the Russian Federation is currently conducting its nuclear readiness drills throughout the entirety of the country, with the announcement coming out today that the Russian Federation has forward deployed nuclear warheads into the Republic of Belarus as a part of these drills, leading to significant concerns that this may be some sort of a development by the Russian Federation to be able to excuse the forward deployment permanently of nuclear weapons inside of Belarus. At the same time, the Ukrainian Armed Forces and the government of Ukraine has started to give specific threats to the Republic of Belarus about their possibility of joining the war in Ukraine, stating that if it does appear that the attacks are imminent by the Republic of Belarus or on the soil and territory of the Republic of Belarus against the armed forces in the state of Ukraine, the Ukrainians will conduct preemptive strikes against the Belarusians to be able to try and throw them off kilter and possibly even counterattack to completely wipe away any attacking force before it gets the moment of opportunity to strike against Ukraine. Lukashenko made a direct response immediately after the statement was made today, claiming that the Belarusians have no intention of joining the war and they will only attack Ukraine if they are attacked themselves. So it does appear that at the moment, the Republic of Belarus is possibly getting cold feet about their potential joining of the conflict due to the Ukrainian threats that were made today. We've also been able to hear, additionally, that air raids have been sounded within eastern Lithuania and, eastern Lithuania and eastern Latvia over the course of the past 24 hours, as drones have been spotted incredibly close to these border regions or entering the areas at this moment. We've also been able to hear, additionally, that the armed forces of Ukraine have been delivering massive amounts of damage to the Russian armed forces across the front line today, stopping them in their tracks and inflicting significant casualties. The Ukrainians have also conducted major strikes throughout the day on the occupied territories of Ukraine, particularly against a Russian FSB headquarters near to the town of Chonhar at the Chonhar Gap leading into Crimea, leading to the significant loss of FSB personnel and operatives, which were surveilling the public within this area and also continuing to surveil the Russian army for any signs of possible dissent. We've also been able to hear, outside of all of these major bits of news in Europe, that the United States president is now announcing the redeployment of 5,000 troops that are now going to be sent to Poland after 5,000 troops had their deployment canceled just last week. We have also been able to hear that the Secretary of State will be arriving in NATO, to the NATO headquarters in Brussels in Belgium, to be able to talk to the heads of the NATO alliance and to be able to talk about further developments moving on from this point forward. We've also been able to hear, additionally, within the Middle East, that the United States and the Iranians are continuing to deliberate the peace deal, which appears to be going about absolutely nowhere at this moment. We have also been able to hear indications over the course of the day that a peace deal was incredibly close, if not right around the corner, and as the day continued to unfold, the reality of that situation started to unravel, and now we understand that at the moment we're on air, a peace deal is about as far away as it could ever possibly be in the current scenario and in the given moment in time. We've also been able to hear of significant actions that have been made today within the area, showing that the United States may be preparing for an armed conflict with the Islamic Republic of Iran within the near future, but once again, that is largely just playing it as it goes over the course of the day. We have also been able to hear some interesting developments out of the United States as well, but generally, most of our major news today comes out of the armed forces of Ukraine and the Russian Federation almost entirely, and we are going to be making sure to get into each and every single bit of news, starting with our largest stories first and then moving our way on down into the smaller stories throughout the night. And we have quite a humongous amount of news to talk about over the course of the day. So moving us on immediately into our largest news, we are going to be moving into the Russian Federation, as we have been able to hear that within the area of Russia, there has been once again continued significant drone attacks by the armed forces of Ukraine against Moscow, against the major cities along the Volga River, and against the entirety of the country over the course of the day. At this moment right now, just when we were going on stream, we did get reports of another large Ukrainian drone attack that was underway inside of the Russian Federation. From what we understand, this drone attack is attempting to target the entirety of Western Russia, this is starting to become something of a daily occurrence at this point for large drone attacks to be able to attempt attacks on the entirety of Western Russia instead of any particular oblast, city, or region like we've seen in prior attacks, which were somewhat large but still smaller in scale than these. We've currently also been able to hear that it's approximately 300 Ukrainian long-range attack drones which are currently involved in this attack at the moment, and are attempting to make their way to their targets throughout the Russian Federation. And we've also been able to hear that a missile threat and drone threat has been issued over the following regions under Russian control or inside of the Russian Federation. And these are as follows: the Oryol Oblast, Belgorod, Ulyanovsk, Penza, Saratov, Moscow, Lipetsk, Kursk, Bryansk, Nizhny Novgorod, Leningrad, Volgograd, Rostov, Tula, Smolensk, Tambov, Pskov region, the Republic of Mordovia, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and Luhansk regions. So this means that the entirety of Western Russia, like we were saying just a moment ago, is under attack, because if you mapped out all of these oblasts, this quite literally is everything from the Volga River west that is currently under Russian control. So this is showing us that the drone attack is, as usual, large in scale, like they have been over the past 6 days. These attacks also started to cause a great deal of concern once again around the Moscow city area, as some Russian drone monitors were starting to report that the drones had started to arrive towards the southern end of Moscow and then started flying apparently deliberately through the outer ring of the air defense perimeter in a large semicircle, apparently attempting to force the Russians to fire expensive and irreplaceable air defense munitions at the drones to see if they could find the Russians wasting them in the midst of this ongoing raid. We haven't been able to hear of any drones at the moment that deliberately flew into the Moscow air defense perimeter attempting to hit targets today, so it looks like for today, central Moscow did get a bit of a reprieve from the threat of drone attacks, but the outer perimeter of Moscow was still embroiled and embattered in the same kinds of drone defense scenarios that we've been seeing in this area for almost a week at this point. We also got a brief clip of one of these drones flying over Moscow right here, where you could hear the audio of the drone just outside of this apartment. And we can hear it.
Man, this dude over here is chilling.
Bro, he just sitting there, barbecue sauce and all. Bro, like he's just like.
That caught me off guard, man. I looked up and I saw that dude in that chair. I was like, what am I looking at? Well, thankfully, it's just a dude sitting in a chair.
Man, it's an average night in Russia. Like, man, what do you want me to say?
I like how the dude's not saying a word either. The Russians believe that if you remain silent, that none of your words can be used against you in court and the drone won't find you.
Bro, it sounds like he's on the computer. Did you hear that? It sounded like a mouse clicking over there. He went click, click. Bro, like he's browsing the web. He's like, these drone attacks might be happening, but I must pull up what I need. Who knows what the hell that is? I mean, he's shirtless. But outside of that, and then they dropped the phone at the end. So really just a confused group of people here in Moscow.
Yeah, apparently they got so scared that was filming it, they just dropped dead, apparently. They just, like, fell out like they fainted.
they were listening to the drone, and then in the end they went, oh, and then just dropped the phone and dropped dead. I guess, I don't know. Kind of a little weird, but moving us on from that, the drones then circled, at least this part of the attack, circled around the outer ring of the Moscow air defense perimeter where the S-300s and the S-400s are at, and then started to make their way towards their actual targets, which were within Yaroslav and also within the town of Dubna. Dubna has had a couple of confirmed hits, meaning that technically there was an attack on Moscow today, but I have to say in very strong emphasis, the Moscow Oblast, not Moscow City. But we did get to see the smoke rising from the town of Dubna after the attack, clearly confirming a direct hit by a Ukrainian drone somewhere within the area. Interestingly enough, this was also filmed over the reservoir that's in the central area of the town of Dubna. And if we look around here, we can actually see this bridge right here. And using our amazing geolocation skills, we can see the lock to the dam is on the left side of the cameraman's point of view. So if we go down here, we can see the lock on the left-hand side of the river, meaning that they are looking towards the northern side of the city, somewhere up in here. And if we were to try and align that fire in its exact location, location where it was over this tree line, it looks to have been somewhere around the area of the Dubna engineering plant. So this means that the Ukrainians have been able to land a hit, at least from what we can tell at the moment, by a very well, I guess you could say shorthand geolocation or rapid fire geolocation. It appears that they were able to hit the Dubna engineering plant, which most likely produces some form of components or machinery vital to the Russian war effort and vital to the assembly and production of equipment used by the Russian Armed Forces. Or it may be a sub-factory that's involved in sub-assemblies that help to produce parts and components that are used in final in-stage production for Russian war equipment as an extension of the Russian war industry, making this a legitimate military target by all extensions. We've actually seen the city of Dubna hit before, and I believe the last time we saw it get hit, it was actually around this specific facility down here, which I believe, if I remember our research from last time being correct, is a drone factory of some sort, but there was a larger warehouse type building within the city of Dubna that had been hit prior. Actually, no, correction, it was actually this building right here, the one with the helipads and also the shelter right next to it. This is actually the building that they hit last time, right just north of the Dubna engineering plant. So they've either hit the drone factory within this area, literally across from the engineering plant, or they hit the engineering plant itself. Both of them are probably involved in the production of Garan 2 drones that are used by the Russian Federation and their long-range attacks against Ukraine. Further than that, we've also been able to see that continued drone flights were made past Dubna and towards the town of Yaroslavl. Footage was made along the way, letting us hear these drones making their way into the city of Yaroslavl, which we can hear right here.
I guess all these are heading back straight for the oil refinery, I guess. That's the main target in the city mainly.
Yes, it is. Yaroslavl is a special city, filled with special things. But one of the most special things in the town of Yaroslavl is on the M8 motorway that heads towards the area of the city of Moscow. And it is this large refinery right here. This refinery has actually been hit a decent amount of times so far in the war, and it's one of the larger ones in terms of overall production quantities daily in this area of central Russia. The Ukrainians were able to find this refinery and were able to land a couple of hits on it, which we're able to see right here. So to give you all a little bit of an indication here, because we were able to do some rough geolocation on this, this person is somewhere within these Khrushchevkas right around here, around Arena 2000, and they are looking southwards down the M8 highway and towards the area of the refinery. The refinery is obscured in the point of view from the camera person because of these forests that are in between the camera person and the refinery, which is blocking the base of the fire from visibly being seen in the footage, but it is confirming that the actual refinery, I guess you could say, subcomplex of the oil refinery has been directly hit and damaged as a result of this attack. We also were able to see in another clip as well what appears to be some Russian oil workers around the area of Bliet. Is he in a gulag? Why is he like below a fence with barbed wire on it?
Honestly, I'm not even sure, really. I guess he's in a cage or something. He's trying to get away from the drones.
Man, bro, he said, I'm in Vorkuta Gulag. I mean, and we just heard a drone blow up. Man, I gotta say, they're really letting the rules lax in the gulags. They're letting them have the phones in there these days. I remember back in the day, they didn't allow that kind of stuff. We also were able to see another clip from the attack in Yaroslavl. This one only let us hear the sound of the blast. It didn't let us visually confirm the location, but we've already done that in a prior clip, so really no point in doing that a second time. Let us listen. Over, Bliet! Up to your might. Well, quite a large attack, I'd have to say, at the minimum. And it does appear that the Ukrainians are really laying down a significant amount of damage at this point within the area surrounding the periphery of Moscow. They hit the Yaroslavl refinery a second time over the course of this week, and they've now also hit the drone manufacturing and engineering plant and the city of Dubna, meaning that they're already causing significant economic damage to the Russian Federation, and not only that, they're also causing war industry damage to the Russian Federation as well, and decreasing their ability to produce wartime components and also equipment for the Russian Armed Forces. We've also been able to hear that at the same time, a lot of people are also talking about the significant involvements that we've been hearing of the Russian armed forces throughout the entirety of the Russian Federation. I'm sorry, folks, I'm trying to take a minute here because I'm trying to understand something that just came through at the moment. But moving us on from that and down to Kostovo, we also have been able to confirm that there were major hits in Kostovo as well around the roundabout inside the city. It does appear that this was another attempted direct attack on the refinery. Unfortunately, this one did land short and landed near to the roundabout, near to the refinery. But moving us on out of that clip and on into the next piece of news that we have from this major drone attack, we also have been able to confirm that a second refinery was directly impacted and targeted today within the town of Sizran in the Samara region, as it does appear that a heavy billow of smoke was seen and fire was spotted at the refinery after a direct hit today. Once again showing us that significant damage has been caused to the Russian Federation and its oil refining capabilities in the entirety of central Russia. As we do understand at the moment, significant strains are being seen on oil resources and usable fuel products throughout the entirety of the Russian Federation due to these sorts of hits, as around 25% of all Russian oil refineries, most of those within central Russia, have been hit and knocked out by Ukrainian attacks in the prior weeks. And we're seeing that the Ukrainians are continuing these tempos and the amount of damage that's being caused by these attacks at the moment. This is starting to give us a pretty significant indication that Ukrainian drone attacks, once again, as usual, are indefensible by the Russian Federation's air defense forces, and secondly, the Ukrainian armed forces are continuing to rake up a significant amount of economic damage against the Russian Federation, which is starting to have a considerable impact on the Russian government's ability to fund and continue the conflict, and also for the Russian Federation to be able to see that their country can survive in any meaningful form longer than the Ukrainians can in the current conflict. Right now, a lot of people have also been hearing that in the midst of this attack, there has been an ongoing nuclear drill that was conducted by the Russian Federation over the course of this day, and we were able to see some footage that was published by the Russian army showing some of these nuclear readiness drills that have been conducted across the entirety of the country. This is generally an annual exercise that is conducted by the Russian army, Russian Air Force, and Russian Navy to ensure that all nuclear arsenal and defense components are operational and are able to execute their duties if required by the Russian government in the event of a nuclear attack or in a nuclear first strike, which is a slight possibility in the modern day, and we can actually see some footage coming out of this nuclear drill over the course of the day.
And these right here are in Belarus, these things are driving into?
No, these clips are actually from across the whole of Russia.
Aha.
We see them showing off one of the Topol M ICBM launchers. We can also see them showing off what I would believe to be a Yars IRBM missile launcher, as that was a significant piece of news today, is that their Yars worked. We can also see the Belgorod nuclear-powered submarine, which is generally what we would describe as almost a flagship of the Russian nuclear submarine fleet at this point. It's basically the only modern large ballistic missile submarine that they've been able to build since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and they did show that one off today. It's probably one of the few that actually works or has mostly working components. This was most likely filmed around Arkhangelsk or Murmansk, way up inside the Arctic Circle. And then we can actually see them showing the inside of the vessel. This is actually a rare look inside of the Belgorod nuclear-powered submarine as they go through the nuclear drill.
Was that propaganda on the wall over there on the right? Did you see that? It was like a propaganda banner or something.
Where?
Play some more, you'll see it. Right there on the wall, it's like a propaganda banner. They literally took room out of the side of the wall to add like a banner. Who the hell is that on the picture over there? Like somebody from the Conquistador days or something? Who is that?
That's Tsar Pyotr, who was Peter the Great, as they call him in Russia. He was the guy who pretty much made Russia into anything that had a chance in the modern day, because he tried to westernize them and modernize them as much as he could, but it didn't really do a lot for him in the long run, because they still ended up lagging far behind any of their European counterparts, even with all the efforts that he made to try and modernize the Russian Empire.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess they find him so important they put him on the wall with a quote, like it's from one of those quotable websites or something.
Bro, I wonder what the quote is. Honestly, that's probably a good question. Bro, it's probably a quote like something like, "The submarine force is one of critical strategic importance to a modern Russian state." And then he put dash Tsar Peter. Problem is they didn't have submarines in Tsar Peter's time, so I doubt that he said that. But, you know, maybe that's the quote. Who knows?
Командиру боевой части 5 приготовить подводную лодку для плавания на перископной глубине на ходу 6 узлов.
And we can also see this guy here with the red canteens all over him, apparently screaming out some sort of a sentence of some sort. I've heard, folks, that they actually use this guy's bald head to signal Morse code message to the nearby ships whenever they need to get a message across without using the radio. They just, you know, surface a little bit, they get the sail up above the water, and then they have this guy flip his head up and down when the sun's shining, and they're able to get the messages out to everybody in the surrounding area. That is one hell of a what would we call that? A shined bald head. It reflects light. It's something else.
Есть руль вправо 5 на курс 340.
Also got to say, it's kind of a little lame, to be honest with y'all, that they conducted this nuclear drill with the submarine surfaced basically right outside of the naval wharf that it operates from. This is maybe like 10, 20 miles away at best. So they basically went on a boating expedition today on the Belgrade just to go out about an hour away or so, do this little drill, and then sail back. I would have to say, folks, I think this is showing that the Russians are not extremely confident of the submarine's capabilities, because usually with a nuclear drill like this, at least if we're talking about the U.S.'s end, our submarines are usually somewhere almost on deployment or any deployment when they're conducting a nuclear readiness drill like this. So the fact that it's only left the wharf maybe 10 miles away out of view, it's not really looking like they have a lot of confidence in their new submarine.
They're probably worried Ukraine's going to hit with a drone if they take it out here too far away, so they're probably trying to keep it near some of those janky air defenses they have set up.
Oh, dude, that's actually a good point. Yeah, that actually might be the reason. We also see them showing off some other Russian surface vessels that are conducting the escort for the nuclear submarine. Definitely not meeting Tier 1 EPA regulations, that's for sure. Oh, yes! There it is! The town of Arkhangelsk. So they conducted the nuclear drill, folks, about 7 miles out of town. You can literally see it from the helicopter. So what they, like for example, let me give you all an idea of what this would look like for the United States. This would be like taking a U.S. carrier out of Norfolk Naval Shipyard right here, like say the USS Abraham Lincoln after it comes back, and going, okay, we're going to conduct a drill to make sure that everybody on the carrier knows what they're doing. So then they sail it basically into the Chesapeake Bay right about here, and then they conduct all of the carrier preparedness drills in Chesapeake Bay instead of going out into the Atlantic to conduct the drills. That's basically what the Russians did today with this submarine, which is extremely interesting, and I think this is giving us a lot more information than the Russians would probably like us to know in reality. I don't think they realized this when they put this out today, but this is showing, like Matthew was suggesting, either they're incredibly scared of a possible Ukrainian drone attack knocking the sub out if it doesn't have a surface escort, which is a possibility, or it's showing that they have so little faith in the construction of the Belgrade, and there may be some crippling defects or issues that they're not willing to actually submerge the sub at a significant distance from shore because they're scared that the vessel might not ever resurface, or it may run into some sort of catastrophic mechanical failure where it's no longer able to properly function, and now it may be far away from possible rescue. Because something about this, the fact that it's quite literally just outside the port, it's basically showing, at a minimum, that they have some lack of faith in, or confidence in their submarine for some reason that we don't really know of yet, but still a very telltale sign of that fact. We can also see the clip continuing as they show off more of the Belgrade. We can also see them showing off some of their Russian doomsday aircraft, which are based off of the Il-22, by the way. Some of y'all might be thinking, that looks kind of familiar. I mean, it does. Oh my goodness. Would you look at that? Would you? Matthew, do you know what that is?
It's a janky-looking ship.
It's the Slava! It's the Moskva! It's the Moskva sister ship, actually.
Aha, I guess so.
It does appear so. And we see it also sailing out as well. We can also see them showing off some of their new surface combatants, which are not really that impressive. And there goes the Slava. I'm not gonna lie, folks, that's like seeing a ghost, because the Moskva, as many of y'all will know, has been at the bottom of the Black Sea for about 4 years at this point, because it was sunk by the Ukrainians in May of 2022. This is quite literally, by all extensive purposes, a exact carbon copy of the Moskva. If I'm not mistaken, the flagship right now of the Arctic or the Baltic, well, actually it would be the Arctic fleet, is the Slava itself, which is the namesake of the entire class, which would be this one right here. And if that is the case, we're actually seeing that the Russians are whipping out the Slava class cruisers like they still have a chance. We already saw that the Ukrainians were able to knock one out with 2 Bayraktars and a couple of Neptune anti-ship missiles. So I'd have a feeling that this one, competency-wise, is probably about that well off. But it was just safe for certain. Maybe it's got an ace up its sleeve. But we can also see the continuation of the clip as well, showing the vessels going underway to sea to join in as a part of the nuclear readiness drills. And we also see another Russian corvette, this one of an older design as well. You can always tell, folks, the older designs of Russian vessels, because they usually have these sort of anti-ship missile pods that they built near to the bow of the vessel. The Slava class also has its own variant of that, and these usually indicate the much older designs of vessels that were made during the Soviet era. You see them showing the calm seas. The only thing calm at this point in Russia are the seas.
They now have...
Oh, I gotta tell you, folks, it's a real treat. It's a real treat. You see, in China, they call these the Type 94 Jin class. In Russia, I believe that these are the Delta 4 class, if I'm not mistaken. But these are also another ballistic missile carrying nuclear-powered submarine of theirs in their arsenal. These are a lot older and are generally from the Soviet era. All of them are. Most of them were commissioned in the late 1970s and the early 1980s. And a lot of these subs were actually mothballed after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then reinstated or recommissioned during the late 2000s and the early 2010s. Because of the fact that they were mothballed for about 15 years or so on average, it's believed that a lot of these submarines may not have operational components, because either the Russian Federation didn't have the industrial capability to replace worn-out industrial components and machinery on board, or the vessels generally lack the requisite funding to be able to get the systems operational, even if the industrial base exists. The reason why we believe that, folks, is because the Moskva, it turns out, while afloat and operational and looking like it was perfectly fine on the surface, when it was sunk in 2022, it turns out that most of the critical operational systems and most redundant systems on board were not operational due to a lack of funding or a lack of an availability to source the parts that would be needed to replace the ones that had broken down while it was mothballed.
Military hardware.
I gotta say, that thing's got a hell of a hump. I also see them unrolling the canvas. I'm not gonna lie, these guys look like absolute goofs in this uniform. Like, they're wearing the leather belts. Bro, these guys look like Chechen separatists. They don't even look like they're in the Russian army.
Yeah, honestly, I kind of do.
Man, honestly. We can also see them loading it. It is actually a Kinzhal hypersonic on a MiG. The MiG-31K
is this is the most boring nuclear exercise I've ever seen in my life. This is just like the Russians doing basic and normal everyday maintenance, basically.
It's a little bit boring, but still showing us a lot of their nuclear capabilities, which, to be honest with y'all folks, aren't really looking too good at this day and age.
Y'all, that's...
So I'll be honest with y'all folks, from the little bit of footage that the Russian Ministry of Defense put out today, the picture of their nuclear readiness drills isn't one that's that promising. Most of their equipment is either old and outdated, and we've already known that before the war they were having budgeting issues to keep a lot of these systems at full operational capability, also with their built-in redundancies, and we're also noticing that there are some clear strains on the Russian Federation's nuclear deterrence, and also their lack of confidence in some of their newest nuclear weapon systems, like the Belgorod nuclear-powered submarine. A lot of people are starting to wonder what is going on with this nuclear readiness exercise. I do have to remind everyone that this is an annual exercise, and over the course of the past 4 years, we have seen them conducted every single year during the month of May, but it is a little bit important to note that in the current day and era, the Russian Federation is starting to possibly indicate a lot more in a serious form that they might use some form of nuclear weaponry at some point in the future if they are pushed into a corner. And so a lot of people are currently talking at this moment right now about what the Russian Federation really meant by this nuclear readiness exercise that is still ongoing at this moment right now. And so, Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
So before we get into all of that, we actually need to hit the news first about the nuclear warheads being moved into Belarus. So do you have those posts to go over?
So moving us on into that, we were able to hear as a part of this nuclear exercise that the Russian Federation did announce that they had moved nuclear warheads to field storage sites in Belarus. And according to the information that we have, the Russian Defense Ministry has claimed the drill involves practicing the joint use of nuclear weapons stationed in Belarusian territory. Whenever things get difficult on the battlefield, as next it claims, the Kremlin once again pulls out its favorite prop, which is nuclear threats, which is a pretty adept sort of a description. And this actually shows us a little bit of the footage of those Russian units that were deploying the nuclear warheads or moving them into storage locations inside of Belarus. I also have to point out that a part of this nuclear readiness drill was actually conducted on the territory of the Republic of Belarus over the course of the day, which most importantly involved the Yars intermediate range ballistic missile, which one was successfully launched inside of the heartland of the Russian Federation, I believe east of the Urals, which did once again show us that the Yars intermediate range ballistic missile, which only has a range to be able to hit the UK, at its farthest, is capable and operational to some extent, although we do not know the percentage success rate of the launches that would be conducted during those moments in time. But we can see here them once again erecting the Yars TEL to be able to launch.
Also, I think we saw his clue last night, by the way.
We did, but this is the only one we have of the Yars and the exercise in Belarus, so I'm having to get to that to make sure that we have it covered. But from what we generally understand, the storage site is most likely at the Khrushchev 6 aerodrome, which is inside of the farthest eastern regions of Belarus, right here, as we did see prior in the winter of 2025, or more so the winter of 2024 to 2025, that the Russian Federation had actually been allowed by the Belarusian government to operate intermediate range ballistic missile forces and those that are nuclear armed from the Khrushchev 6 aerodrome. Since then, we've seen that significant refurbishments have been conducted to some critical parts of the facility to make it conducive for IRBM missile launches, and we've also seen some temporary forces of the Russian Federation's nuclear forces based at this facility to be able to ensure that they are able to conduct nuclear launches if necessary. The announcement has finally come out today that the Russians have based and stored nuclear weapons inside of the Republic of Belarus, most likely affiliated with the Yars IRBM missile. And that highly likely means, considering that this facility was specifically outfitted publicly for the storage of IRBMs, the operation of an IRBM missile battery, and also for the operations of the Russian Federation's nuclear defense forces, that it is highly likely that they have based or stored those Yars intermediate range ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads here at the Khrushchev 6 aerodrome. And so a lot of people right now are talking about the fact of this happening today as a part of these nuclear readiness drills, quote unquote. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so this part is actually the unprecedented part about all these exercises today. Russia has allegedly moved active nuclear warheads into Belarus specifically for these military drills. So what do you think is happening? Because this is something that we haven't seen take place before. Usually when the Russians practice these nuclear drills, they'll just move around the missiles, but they won't move around the warheads to a large degree, at least not active warheads, they won't. So this time we're seeing that's a different scenario here. So it looks like 60% of the audience said Putin is trying to deter Ukraine from launching some sort of preemptive attack on Belarus, while 16% said Putin plans on a nuclear strike in the very near future, and another 15% said Putin will likely invade from Belarus very soon, and he's using this as a threat against Ukraine. And I got to admit, this is definitely a big move. Right now, by the way, there is a lot of escalation rhetoric between Ukraine and Belarus right now. It is off the charts to a large degree. We're seeing Lukashenko make statements that he will only attack if he's attacked. But if God help us if we have to attack. In other words, Lukashenko is threatening war on Ukraine. Then Zelensky's out here today, and we'll get to this, I'll presume, here in a second. Zelensky's out here saying that he's going to possibly attack Belarus preemptively because he detected pretext intelligence and reports coming out that Belarus might be planning some sort of provocation at the northern end of Ukraine. And then on top of that, we're hearing Putin threaten nuclear weapons in the process and moving them into Belarus actively. So, I mean, it's a lot of stuff going on. Honestly, it's getting really precarious, I would say. So I'm actually with the 15%. I think Putin is planning on invading from Belarus, and that's what Zelensky's been warning about. And this seems to be another move to sort of push the Ukrainians off the situation and threaten them basically back away from the border by putting the nukes into Belarus that are active warheads. So I'm with the 16%, also kind of with the 60% too. It's kind of a deterrence, and also it is a sign, in my opinion, that Zelensky probably is right. Putin's about to invade from the north. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that generally there is a little bit to take from this nuclear exercise, but I do want to make it clear, folks, that this is an annual planned exercise, and we've seen the same exercise happen 4 times over since we started coverage 4 years ago. Each time they happen in May. So generally this is...
With active warheads?
Yes, with active warheads.
I don't, are you sure about that? Because I'm pretty sure this is the first time I ever saw it. Literally every analyst today was saying it was unprecedented that they're moving active warheads into Belarus. Usually they don't move them into Belarus's possession, because we're hearing that Belarus is saying that they have active warheads that Russia has moved and transferred into their temporary command during these exercises. I don't remember hearing about that before during these exercises.
Well, that part, that's what I was about to get to. I wasn't able to finish my comment there, because the nuclear exercise is an annual one that's conducted with live warheads in the Russian Federation. But this is the first time ever that they've deployed nuclear warheads to Belarus, which was just what I was about to get to in answering the poll, to say that this is actually somewhat exceptional and outside of the norm. So getting back to the answer here, it does appear that generally that is something that is exceptional, the fact that they are deploying nuclear weapons into Belarus at the moment. But let me restart this all over again, folks, because I'm sorry, I got kind of thrown off kilter there because I was trying to work on the monologue there. But I would generally have to say the nuclear exercise is one that is annually conducted by the Russian Federation, and we have seen it conducted over the course of the entirety of 4 years annually during the month of May when we have covered the news here on the channel. The one thing that is exceptional, however, about this instance is that the Republic of Belarus is housing and storing nuclear weapons inside of their territory from the Russian Federation, which is the first ever time that we have seen such a development over the course of the entirety of our news coverage. We have also been able to hear additionally that the Belgorod nuclear-powered submarine was seen in actual nuclear readiness exercises for the first time this year as well, which we had not seen before or had seen actual proven indications of that fact out of the port of Arkhangelsk. So it generally is giving us the understanding at this moment that this nuclear exercise is attempting to cause some additional threats at the moment inside of the Western world, and we can generally understand that the fact that they're forward deploying nuclear weapons into Belarus is giving us a pretty significant indication at the moment that the Republic of Belarus is supporting the Russian Federation's ability to start forward deploying nuclear weapons and cause a even more significant threat of nuclear threats and the lack of a possible fast response to first attacks by the Russian Federation against NATO. We also understand that the Belgorod nuclear-powered submarine and its use in deployment today in the nuclear exercises are most likely also attempting to reach that aim as well, and possibly even threaten the United States, as the Belgorod nuclear-powered submarine can carry ICBMs on board. So I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, because I'd actually have to say that I believe that it's more so a deterrence against NATO than anything, because the forward deployment of tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus doesn't really do much to change the situation for Ukraine. The launch of a short-range or an intermediate-range ballistic missile from the current existent territory of the Russian Federation into Ukraine, whether it's launched from Belarus or Russia, would take about the same amount of time. But we do understand at the moment that the difference here is that an attack could be launched on NATO at a far faster rate and at somewhat greater distances than we've seen so far, which now include the United Kingdom and Ireland, which generally were almost out of IRBM range if we were excluding the Republic of Belarus as a territory that was able to field and operate intermediate-range ballistic missiles from their territory. So that generally appears to be the case, in my opinion, and I think this is continuing on with the Russian Federation's aggression and growing anger against the West for their continued support to the armed forces of Ukraine and the Ukrainian government, which has started to cause significant issues for the Russians in the current present day and age. So I
wonder, I just wonder if them moving these active warheads into Belarus, because of course it is coming on the backdrop of Zelensky saying that they might launch possibly, and this is a big possibly, it's not a guaranteed by any means, but Ukraine saying they might decide to launch a preemptive attack if they see that Belarus is pretty much guaranteed to attack from the north or allow Putin to use his forces to attack from the north and side of Ukraine. So I wonder.
Hello, welcome to Lone Wolf Show. What's going on? How are you? Yeah, we do live call-ins here on the show. We are stream channel. I appreciate you dropping in. What's your question? Oh, you got a shout out today? We had a live call-in, y'all. First live call-in. Appreciate the call-in. You got disconnected. Not for sure what happened. If you can, call back.
So it'd be putting them out to dry instead of putting Putin out to dry if they were to do that.
It's possible, but that would generally be a violation of the nuclear non-proliferation treaties, which could open up a possible justification for war by the European states in NATO against the Republic of Belarus for being in the illegal possession of nuclear weaponry, or they could start to create a significant international.
And I hit hang up. Sorry about that. I went to put it on speaker and I hit hang up. Sorry about. Hey, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Welcome to the Lone Wolf Show. We like I said, we do live call-ins here. We do live shout-outs for people on stream. We also do we actually talk about the news too as well here. So if you're interested, sure, we are on Twitch, Kick, Rumble, and YouTube. So we try to stay active every day. We usually on air between 4:30 and 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. But if you have any shout outs or questions, we feel free to answer.
Totally,
if we can.
The missiles.
Yes.
Up my butt. Up deep.
The subscriber you are trying to reach is not available.
We had first call in. I think you're having some phone difficulties. Please call back in when you actually get service or whenever you get a minute. We accept call-ins while we're actually live on air. He was asking questions about the missiles. The missiles that's in Belarus. Russia actually has been taking nuclear missiles to Belarus for the past couple months now. They've been taking hypersonic and ICBM capable missiles to Belarus. If that's one thing that you're actually talking about. Another thing is on May 20th, Russia actually launched a nuclear test. And he did it by sea, land, and air. He did strategic bombers. He did destroyers launching cruise missiles. And he also did land-based ICBMs launching in the air. This was just a test. It was not a real assault on any kind of foreign land. This was a scheduled test for Russia. They usually have one once a year just to be sure that their arms is up to code and up and ready to go just in case of emergency. But the situation with Belarus and Ukraine is getting really, really hairy. So they're saying that Zelensky is saying that Belarus is actually planning a sneak attack on Ukraine. And I mean, if they do that, then Ukraine's going to attack Belarus. And I don't think Belarus is ready for Ukraine. I mean, Russia's not even ready for Ukraine. But I hope that answers your question. If you are not subscribed to the channel yet, I really advise you to subscribe. And if you don't mind, like the show, like the videos. We are, like I said, we are on air usually every day at 4:30 Eastern Standard Time and 10:30 at night. If we're not on at 4:30, we're definitely on at 10:30 at night. Please feel free to drop in anytime. Drop a call. Like I said, this is a free call in. This is not. You do not have to pay anything when you call in to chat or anything like that. It's all free. So feel free to call in. Don't matter if you just call in, hang up. Please call.
Diplomatic fallout to where you could start to see significant forward deployments of nuclear weapons from the Republic of France or the UK directly on Belarus's borders or Russia's borders, considering that they would have had to have provided those nuclear weapons to Belarus, and that would start to increase the chance of an all-out tactical and then strategic nuclear exchange, which probably wouldn't be in the long-term benefit, at least at the moment in strategic planning, for the Russian Federation or the Republic of Belarus.
Maybe so. I just feel like, I don't think really Russia or Belarus cares about the nuclear treaties for the most part. But I think the pure threat that they're moving them there, and also, by the way, I think it was back in 2023 that Putin moved tactical weapons into Belarus. We think that they're in storage, though. We don't think that they're actively being fielded by Belarus or simply in storage in Belarusian territory. But we don't know the full details of exactly what they've done right now. It sounds to me, based on the reports I've heard, that Putin has moved active warheads into Belarus that could be under Belarusian control during these exercises. But once again, there's some question marks around that, about who actually controls them and who has the ability to actually launch it. But we can't overlook the fact that right now the tensions are high between Belarus and Ukraine, and that now nuclear weapons are sort of getting pulled into the mix.
It certainly does appear to be quite concerning, and we'll have to make sure to try and keep an eye on it and give you all any updates that we can on the situation as it continues to unfold. But moving us on out of that news, we were able to hear that at the same time today, the Ukrainians, through the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, have once again issued a direct statement about the possibility of Belarus being joined into the active conflict against the state of Ukraine on the side of the Russian Federation, and have directly warned that if they believe that such an action is imminent, they may even conduct preemptive strikes against the Republic of Belarus for those actions. We did get to hear that Lukashenko then responded today that Belarus will only enter the war if they are attacked, which appears to have been some form of a response after Zelensky's speech to try and start backtracking possibly off of the ever-present threat that the Ukrainians could try and conduct a preemptive attack against the Republic of Belarus if they believed that a war was imminent. Speaking during the Belarusian-Russian nuclear drills, the Belarusian dictator stated that Belarus had no need to get involved in the war in Ukraine. However, he did add that Belarus could be drawn into the conflict only if its own territory is subjected to aggression. He also stated that he's ready to meet with Volodymyr Zelensky to discuss bilateral relations, and did not rule out holding such a meeting on Ukrainian soil. So this could be there's a lot to take from this, and there's different kind of understandings that people have had and opinions on this, but two of the most prevailing ones that we've seen today is that this is either Belarus trying to lay out some form of a possible casus belli by conducting a false flag attack on their territory, which would then give them the justification publicly to join into the conflict against Ukraine, or this is more so Lukashenko trying to back off after the Ukrainians have made it clear that they'll start to lay waste to Belarus if necessary to be able to try and decrease the tensions. And considering the fact that this news came out at about 6 a.m. in the morning today, local time here in Utah, and the speech from Zelensky where he threatened the preemptive attack against Belarus came out at about, I think it was 2 or 3 in the morning local time here in Utah, so about 3 or 4 hours before this statement came out, it appears that this is most likely the latter, in that Belarus was backing off and trying to lessen the tensions between Belarus and Ukraine due to the threats that Ukraine made that if Belarus joins into the active conflict, the Ukrainians are going to start laying waste to the Belarusian Armed Forces about as quickly as they can. This is also giving us an understanding that Belarus's position may be incredibly difficult at this point in time in terms of diplomacy and foreign policy, because the Russian Federation may be putting significant emphasis on their government, which we're largely understanding at this point, to be able to enter the war or to support a Russian attacking force from their own borders somewhere within the northern area of the Ukrainian border. These attacks, by the Ukrainians' claims, would be attempting to reach the Chonhar area or the Sumy Oblast, meaning that most of the attacks would be originated and conducted from a basing area inside the city of Gomel within the Republic of Belarus. We're not entirely sure how much success there's going to be on executing that plan because of the fact that the Russian Federation and Belarus now seem to be in a bit of a quagmire where Belarus may be trying to back off of the support for the Russians launching an invasion from Belarusian territory, or we may be seeing that Belarus is trying to lay out a possible justification for a future false flag to try and get involved in the war and make it seem like it was a decent explanation or reasoning as to why. But a lot of people are currently talking about this right now. And Matthew, what are people thinking about it? And what are you thinking about it as well?
Okay, so out of all the stuff happening with Belarus, what do you think is going to happen with it? It looks like generally people were pretty much split on this issue. 40% said war is likely coming between Belarus and Ukraine, while 37% said nothing will probably end up happening, and 16% said it seems like the usual, or it seems like unusual tensions actually. And of course, we do know that over the course of the several years the war's been running, that Belarus has always been the lapdog to Putin. So there's always been natural tensions because of that. And of course, sometimes Lukashenko visits Putin, sometimes Putin visits Lukashenko sometimes. There's clearly a strong relationship there. But Belarus so far has pretty much resisted being dragged into the war. They've generally put their foot down, at least the best they probably can, to get out of the war. But it's always been a wild card that Putin can call on. If the war starts going really sideways, he could try to drag Belarus in. And I would say right now certainly qualifies. The war is going awfully for Putin. They're starting to lose frontline territory pretty quickly, actually, according to recent ISW assessments. And I think that they're starting to get so desperate they might have to call Belarus in. That's their wild card they've been waiting on. And I think that now might be the time. So I'm with the 42%. Zelensky's been warning about it. It seems to be possibly plausible and logical that they would drag Belarus in because they're getting desperate. So I think that war might be coming, actually. But I think, though, it's probably not going to be the Belarusian military launching the attack from the north of Ukraine. It'll probably be the Russian forces launching it from Belarusian territory. But I mean, that's de facto dragging Lukashenko into it. That's basically dragging Belarus in anyway. So it's probably going to be Russia doing it from their territory. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I'd be with the 34%. I'd be frank at this point. I don't really think much of anything is going to end up happening because I think that the reason why the Ukrainians have started to make significant public statements about an impending invasion from the Belarusian border is to be able to preempt it and then create such a significant threat to the Belarusians as a result of threatening things like preemptive strikes and whatnot, that the Belarusian government may not be that apt to support a Russian invasion from their territory, and they may get cold feet and start to back off. The Belarusian Armed Forces are not designed to be able to operate in any form of an independent offensive or even defensive operation. Since 2005, they've been in a mutual defense agreement with the Russian Federation, which has seen that their armed forces have been restructured into a logistical support force for the Russian Federation conducting expeditionary operations on their territory, meaning that Belarus doesn't actually have any way doctrinally or militarily to be able to successfully conduct any offensive or defensive attacks in support of their territory without significant help or fielding of Russian armed forces on the territory of Belarus. The fact that Belarus also has to be willing to give permission to the Russian Federation to conduct an attack on their territory, because while Belarus is a Russian puppet, they still have to give that form of authorization. They are starting to see that that could come with significant risk. If Belarus is opened up to Ukrainian drone attacks, Ukraine can easily conduct the volume and intensity of drone attacks seen against Russia on Belarus alone on the daily as well. Their long-range drone production figures, which are around 600 to 700 a day, well support the drone attacks they're currently conducting right now, which is 300 a day against the Russian Federation. They could throw another 200 at Belarus every single day and still be putting 100 drones behind them in storage because of their production volumes and capacity inside of Ukraine and the support that they're also getting internationally in drone production at this point as well. Belarus has no built up or well equipped air defenses to speak of inside of their country that could be able to deal with the drone threat. They do not have a large amount of conventional long-range surface-to-air missile defense forces. They do not have any medium-range surface-to-air missile defenses, and they hardly have any number of man-pads. They might be able to create some mobile fire groups, but that would take time, and during that time, Belarus could find itself being overwhelmed by Ukrainian drone attacks, and the very little economic activity that is currently unfolding inside of Belarus might come to an end very rapidly if the Ukrainians start to hit strategic and significant industries within the Republic of Belarus, meaning that they might.
But you forget though that Putin has so much air defense around his mansions. He could always spare some of those mansion-based air defenses for Belarus. Like surely he would give up some for them, wouldn't he?
Oh, sure. Nah, I'm like, nah, he's not giving up any of that.
Man, he won't even give the air defense for his own people. He's definitely not giving it up for Belarus. So that would be a problem. But do you think that Ukraine would attack the Belarusian military? Like, let's just say hypothetically, the Belarusian military stays completely out of the situation, and they simply basically give a land lease to the Russians to come in on the border of Belarus and launch an attack on Ukraine from the border territories of Belarus. I mean, would Ukraine even bother attacking the Belarusians at that point, or would they simply focus on the invading Russian forces?
I think that they probably would, because the long-range drone forces really can't be used in any other way but attacking long-range strategic targets. So if they wanted to retaliate at all, beyond them just using FPV drones and their infantry, motorized and mechanized infantry battalions and also brigades against a Russian invasion, their only recourse would be to start conducting major attacks inside of Belarus. And considering that Belarus would have to give some form of basing permissions and also the allowance for hostilities on their territory to the Russian army to conduct an action like that, I have a feeling that the Ukrainians would probably respond this time, because they're, by doing this threat right now of threatening, we will blow up everything in Belarus if you let the Russians launch an invasion on us from your territory, they're putting the Belarusians in a position where they're going, we don't have enough air defense, clearly, so the Ukrainians are going to overrun everything and blow up whatever they want in our country on a whim every day, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. And we don't really gain anything out of this whole arrangement. We only stand to lose a whole lot. And the Russians get to invade Ukraine from the north. But as we've seen in the Sumy Oblast and also in Vovchansk over the past few years, that offensive is probably going to end up petering out pretty quick and then end up as a bloody stalemate for years, meaning that the Russians offensively are probably not going to gain much out of it, and the Belarusians stand to lose a great deal. So when they look at that on the diplomatic side of things, they're going to go, we might be Russia's puppet, but we have to make the case to Putin and tell him no, because we can't support a Russian invasion from our territory, because the Ukrainians are saying the truth, which they certainly could follow through with their threat. We could see that the entire Belarusian economy is in the same condition as Russia's in less time than it took for Russia to be in that state, maybe even less than a year, if Ukrainian attacks are large enough and damaging enough inside of their country.
So you don't think they would attack the Belarusian military, or you think that they would?
I would say that they would, because that adds a lot to the threat right now that gets Belarus hung up in the diplomatic phase to where they're possibly allowing Russia to conduct attack from their territory, and now they're going, that might not be a good idea.
I wonder if Belarus has control over nuclear weapons, like regardless of the treaties, because I doubt Belarus and Russia really care about treaties at this point. They pretty much violated every treaty under the sun at this point. If Belarus has some of those nukes under their control, I mean, that could be a very complicated aspect of this problem right here, because if Ukraine launches a strike on Belarus, I mean, they could use that as a justification to launch a nuke at Ukraine at that point. So that's the big question mark. Do they have nukes under their control? Are they able to launch them? And are they willing to launch them possibly?
Maybe, but I would still feel like that'd be a little bit of a stretch, because if Ukraine is not physically invading Belarus, there's really no way for Belarus to say there's an existent threat to their state to justify a defensive nuclear strike on an enemy country, because they're not physically being invaded, which is one of the critical components of an existential threat to the state, is that the state is soon to cease to exist because it's being invaded by an enemy force, and it literally will not exist tomorrow. The Ukraine just slamming them with hundreds of drones on the daily and rendering their economy to rubble, that isn't really an existential threat, because the state technically still exists. It's just that they don't really have a lot to get tax revenue from at that point. So I would say, and also on top of that, Belarus using a nuke, that could have a lot of bad consequences. Like, for example, what did the French decide at that point? That the situation is getting bad enough that they launch a warning shot nuke into Belarus as a response. And Belarus might think that that's a legitimate concern as well, because the French nuclear doctrine is that if they believe that there's any sort of an existent threat to their state, they can fire a warning shot nuke to give the other side a fair warning that things are about to get nasty if you don't stop, and this is only a taste of our kind of power that we could throw at you. And at that point, I think that the situation would start getting so unstable in Europe, France might actually consider some sort of a warning shot nuke at that point against Belarus, especially considering that Belarus would technically be at that point a rogue nuclear state.
Maybe. I think you got more faith in NATO's response than I do, because, they've said for a while that if X, Y, Z happens, they'll get involved. I mean, France has made a lot of statements saying they're going to get involved. They're going to do X, Y, and Z. They're going to possibly send troops on the ground and stuff like that. And they've made a good show of it when it comes to statements, but they really haven't followed through with pretty much anything they've ever said when it comes to helping out Ukraine, except for sending weapons. They have followed through with that, but also the U.S. has to a large degree until recently as well. So I don't know what kind of response we'd be looking at. They could shock the NATO alliance so badly that they're kind of frozen, possibly, because nobody really expects anybody to actually actually follow through with a nuclear threat. So I'm not totally sure how they would respond. Really, I'm not totally concrete on that.
I would say that this one would probably be considered a do or die by the French, without question. I don't know about the British. The British might be up in the air on it, but the French would probably consider this a do or die. Because think about it. Belarus now has nuclear weapons, clearly in violation of international treaty. So by all definition, they're now a rogue nuclear state. In that hypothetical scenario that you're explaining, they now have shown that they have more than a willingness to use a nuclear weapon like that against anybody who poses even a minimal threat to Belarus, because Ukraine is imposing an existential threat to the state by just conducting large drone attacks on Belarus daily. So that threat didn't at all meet any threshold for any reasonable person or government in the world to justify the use of a tactical nuclear weapon. So now Belarus is in the illegal possession of nuclear weapons. They just used one of those nuclear weapons, and now they can use that nuclear weapon against anybody else, however many they have left in the area, if they pose even a slight threat to the Belarusian state. So at that point, France would probably be going, this is becoming quite concerning, especially if they have IRBMs. They could fire one of those at us, and we're not going to be able to respond, possibly. They could hit Paris in minutes, and then most of our responsibilities would be knocked out because the French Ministry of Defense has been destroyed, and the office of the president might be dead as well. So then they might think, we might need to fire a warning shot nuclear weapon into Belarus to give them a clear warning that if they continue on, we're going to destroy them. And I would feel
you say a warning shot nuclear weapon. You say I'm not sure there's such thing as a warning shot with a nuclear weapon. I think once one of those fired, it's over with.
Well, the French nuclear doctrine has a warning shot clause within it.
The French are wilding out. I've never heard of a nuclear warning shot. That's an interesting concept.
Well, I mean, it's in the French nuclear doctrine. That's what they say. They say if it ever gets concerning enough, they'll fire, they won't fire it into a place like Minsk. They'll usually, the plan for them would be to fire it into a place that doesn't cause a whole lot of damage. And then, basically by that showing, we can fire a nuke, it will hit, and the next time it's not going to be on nothing, it's going to be on something actually important, like a major city or an army group. So, think wisely, because time's running out. That's what the French warning shot equates to in their doctrine of how it would end up being used. So there is always a possibility if the French feel concerned enough or scared enough, that could happen, especially in that kind of a scenario, which would be unheard of in modern history. That might be one that would justify them using a warning shot like they have in their nuclear doctrine. But moving us on out of that and out of Belarus, we have also been able to hear that over the course of the day, there has been some air alerts issued within the areas of eastern Latvia and also northeast Lithuania, which we were able to hear of both over the course of the day. These were both caused by possible drones entering the airspace, and we did get to hear that NATO Baltic air policing was mobilized as a response, but we didn't hear of any shootdowns or any drones that actually entered these areas at any point in the future. We've also been able to hear that the president announced today in Poland the following. Based on the successful election of the now president of Poland, Karol Nawrocki, who I was proud to endorse in a relationship with him, I'm pleased to announce that the United States will be sending an additional 5,000 troops to Poland. This came just a week after, by the way, he canceled the deployment of 5,000 troops to Poland. So he canceled the deployment of 5,000 troops to Poland, and now we're deploying 5,000 troops to Poland. So this is quite literally just a reversal on the troops that we canceled the deployment on just last week. So it's not growing our force by any means inside of Poland. It's actually keeping the force size the exact same as it was literally a couple of months ago, because we canceled the deployment of an entire 5,000 man brigade, and now we're redeploying a 5,000 man brigade into Poland. So not really changing much of anything in the strategic outlook. We've also been able to hear that the Secretary of State is going to be talking to NATO here within the near future, as the U.S. Secretary of State will meet NATO allies on Friday for the first time since the president called the alliance into question due to divisions over the Iran war, and Washington announced plans to pull 5,000 troops from Germany. Before leaving for a meeting of NATO foreign ministers in Sweden, the Secretary of State said the president was very disappointed in alliance members who had not allowed the U.S. to use bases on their territory for the war, singling out Spain in particular. You have countries like Spain denying us the use of these bases. Well, then why are you in NATO? That's a very fair question. That's a great question. Why in the world does the U.S. not allow Spain to have a base in Florida?
Oh, I think we led, and now that I think about it, we just led, what was it, Saudi Arabia have like a flight brigade or a flight squadron or something up in Idaho, I think. Yeah. They're not even part of NATO, though. But it's like, we really don't let NATO countries have bases on the U.S. Although I will say this, though, there's really nowhere they can hop off to that would make those bases useful to a large degree for any NATO European countries. At least in America, there wouldn't be any use for them, really, at least in my opinion. So there's a use for us having them there in Europe because it's a jumping off point to the Middle East, possibly Asia and other places as well. So also people were saying it was Qatar that had the air squadron in Idaho. I think you were right. I think I was mistaken. I said Saudi Arabia. It's actually Qatar, actually. I forgot. I got mixed up there. But I don't know if there would be a use for the NATO bases to be here in the U.S.
Well, outside of that, though, why wouldn't they allow them? Because, according to the President of the United States, we have no use for bases in Europe. Yeah, we have them. So, why in the world do we not allow, why have we never allowed any single European country, any member of NATO, to have have a foreign military base here on U.S. soil?
Probably they're not useful, really. They probably don't want them, actually. I mean, why would Europe really want a base here?
Well, just for the hell of it. I mean, what if, for example, because right now the U.S., according to the president, only has bases in Europe for the hell of it, basically, and there's no point defending Europe. Well, I'm going off that logic, though, to talk about this because, he clearly is wrong. But for the sake of discussion here, we have bases in Europe, but they don't have bases here in America. What if they wanted to say go to war with Venezuela for their own reasons, and they wanted a base here to make that a lot easier? Why don't they have one? What's the point of them being in the NATO alliance since they can't base in the United States if that's the argument being made by the Secretary of State?
I mean, that's what their argument has no merit. That's why it's insane for them to even make that argument. The U.S. Clearly has a reason to have bases in Europe. That's a jumping off point for the Middle East. And since the U.S. We can't get ourselves out of the Middle East because we have to constantly fight there for whatever reason, then we have to have bases there. But there's no reason for Europe to have bases in the U.S. There's no strategic reason for it. And also, I don't think Europe's even asked for bases here because, like I said, they don't really have a reason. So you just can't put any stock into the arguments coming out of the president's office right now. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm trying to point out is that it doesn't make a lot of sense. So moving on from that, I agree. Well, I mean, it's just kind of weird because you sound like you're disagreeing, but you're agreeing, and I'm kind of getting confused with where to go. But anyways, with that, we are going to be moving on out of that bit of news in Belgium, and we are going to be moving on into the United States because we actually have some news to cover over here. But before we do that, I do have to say a humongous thanks to each and every single person who has been watching the stream so far tonight. Because tonight, at the peak of the stream, we've had 15,500 people here, and 63,000 people have watched the stream up to this point of an hour and 10 minutes in. And I got to say that we're entirely honored and greatly appreciative of so many people being here over the course of this night and enjoying the stream. If it wasn't for each and every single one of y'all, we wouldn't have anyone to cover the news for. And we are going to be making sure to get on into the rest of this news. But before we move on into it, I do want to make sure that we take a brief pause for a moment to get to talk to 3 people from the chat and then move on into the rest of the news that we have for the night. So Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so our first super chat of the night goes to a channel legend. It is Cerebrus3, and thank you very much, Cerebrus, for that $100 support. And we do appreciate that very, very much. That is the largest super chat of the night, and of course, we do appreciate that. That does help keep the channel running through that viewer support. And they said, do you think Russia might be trying to show nuclear force power more openly due to reduced amount of drones from the Iran conflict? And one for the chat, please, an LSA.
I would say that generally, I think that they're trying to show the nuclear forces because of the war in Ukraine. I think that it doesn't really have a lot to do with Iran. I think they're still working on the one track that they have been on with the Europeans at the moment, that the Russian Federation's economy is doing pretty badly. The Russian military is doing poorly inside of Ukraine. And for that reason, we're getting an understanding that they're at their ropes' end. And like we've been talking about for years now, once they get to their ropes' end, they're either going to have to decide to peacefully go out or they're going to try and pull every single trick they can under the sun, even ones that might lead to total destruction, to be able to see if they can somehow reverse the situation, at least at the moment. So I would say that generally the nuclear threats that we're seeing today, like the forward deployment of nuclear weapons like IRBMs into Belarus, and also the deployment of the Belgrade today, are generally giving us an idea, at least at the moment, that they're trying to inflict more fear in Europe of a possible nuclear response and how rapidly they might be able to launch a nuclear attack if the decision was ever made. That's generally what I'm thinking. But Matthew, what do you think about it?
I would say it's generally most of it's normal. Like since it's mostly planned operations they do annually anyway, it's usually pretty typical yearly. But the only aspect to me that's the concerning part is whether or not they're giving Belarus access to use nuclear weapons or not. Which that's a real question. It's not known whether or not they have direct access to those weapons or not. So I think that's the only part to me that I would have a question about. But outside of that, though, on the other part of the question, they said maybe they're showing us more because of the amount of drones being used for Iran conflict. I don't know, because you got to remember that Russia produces most of their Shahed drones, and Iran produced them automatically because they automatically came from Iran. That's where the Shahed originated from. I don't think it's probably because of that. It's probably because Russia has been leaning on their nuclear forces for quite some time. Actually, they've been leaning on that because they can't rely on their frontline forces because they can't simply fight. They're losing guys by the tens of thousands monthly, so they have to fall back on the nukes.
And so with that, I hope that does answer that well from both of us, and we will make sure to get that live chat in your honor, Cerebrus. And so what do we got from the live chat in honor of Cerebrus 3?
And this live chat question goes to the original, who said, would NATO jump in if Belarus attacked Ukraine?
I don't think so. I think that at this point it's pretty clear that the Europeans and also NATO as a whole generally considers the war in Ukraine to be Ukraine's problem only to fight directly. And while they might materially support them in the background, like a lot of the European countries are right now, it doesn't really appear that ever coalesces into any form to speak of, or they would ever get directly involved in the conflict in support of Ukraine. So I would have to say that if Belarus got involved in the conflict, my opinion is that at the best case scenario, the Europeans are going to put out a strongly worded letter of condemnation against Belarus for joining the war, and that would be about all they do, because I just don't see them doing anything else at this point. They seem to be pretty comfortable in their position of not being actively engaged in war, considering that they're not forced to be, and for that reason, they're just going to sit back and continue to materially support Ukraine, but never get actively involved. So, unless if the Russians or Belarus directly conducts an armed attack on any one of them, then they might get involved. But as long as it doesn't directly attack any NATO states, they probably never get involved. And I also saw Space Cat say NATO is entirely defensive. And that's true, but just speaking about it as in, would the European countries which are a part of NATO join in Ukraine, would they do that ever if Belarus attacked? And the answer would be no. So I hope that does address that the best I can. And a big thanks to you once again for support, and help this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
We also have a $50 support from none other than Fred Vreeman, another channel legend, and thank you very much, Fred, for that $50 support, also extremely generous. And Fred said, crazy day, and in more moves. It seems to me we need to take the hills up the roads, plus the islands and coast. Shouldn't be too difficult to defend from there. And then the air assets can protect from long-range drones and missiles. A small area and protects water, and comment. We've discussed that at length. Like, we've discussed this one at length right here, but it's a point that can be, like, we could literally discuss this one to the ends of the days, honestly. Like, there's a lot to talk about on this. I would say on the islands, it's really hard, Fred, because if you put like amphibious landing forces on some of those islands near Hormuz, the Iranians have a free reign at that point to start launching nonstop Shahed drone attacks with these attack drones, literally nonstop. And I'm not really sure what defenses the U.S. military has to properly deal with that, because since Iran can launch such large numbers of them, the normal air defenses that the U.S. would have to bring with those forces are going to get overwhelmed. And that's why the drones are so deadly, is because of that overwhelming factor to them, just of sheer quantity. So that's the part I'm questioning. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would generally say that that's probably the best plan that we can have at the moment, because given the situation in the Strait of Hormuz and the fact that there is a minefield that is most likely consisting of hundreds of mines at this point, and the only viable shipping lanes through the area are through Iranian coastal waters, that means there has to be some sort of a direct defense against immediate Iranian attacks that could originate from the coast against those vessels as they're trying to pass through. So something would have to be done to be able to clear out those shipping lanes and make them relatively safe for the ships that are going through them. And the only way to be able to do that would be physically taking Qashem, Larak, and Hormuz Island, and also a lot of the smaller islands out here in the Persian Gulf, and attempting to keep a small amount of forces on them to stop any direct Iranian involvement on the island, but beyond that, not really conducting any further actions. The coastline itself is a bit of a threat, but once you land any forces on the coast, you lose the physical barrier that the sea provides to stop humongous amounts of the Iranian military from just dogpiling on whoever's on that coastline, and that's where the problem will come in. That would make landing troops on the coast fairly difficult in any sort of a larger operation, because if we were conducting it as a limited operation, we would only take an area around the beachhead, meaning that if the Iranians ever conduct any sort of a surprise lightning offensive somehow and are able to pull it off, we could see that half of the U.S. forces are stranded inside of Iran and have no naval access or really any access to any air power to get them out, while the other half are still somewhat intact, which would be an absolutely deplorable situation for the armed forces to be in. So airstrikes can generally deal with most everything on the coastline and deal with anything that's firing at the commercial ships, and then the Marines or the Army, which would mostly be the Marines that are landed on these islands within the Strait of Hormuz and elsewhere, they would be holding those islands to make sure that the Iranians don't come back to them, and then try and base any form of anti-ship weaponry on it that could attack a ship in literally seconds from firing to impact in this area. Once that's done, destroyers could come through after the air operation and the seizure of the islands and start convoy escorts through those shipping lanes with the protection surrounding them, because at that point, we would see that a lot of the anti-ship forces of the Iranians are either so depleted or so far inland that they don't really pose that big of a threat to the destroyers, and they would be able to safely transit through. The only risk that's involved in that operation is how many drones could the Iranians throw at the ground forces that we would land on the islands, and the answer to that, we actually don't know. It might be hundreds of them, thousands even, if they have FPV drones, and that means that if the Marines did get on these islands, they'd have to be in very limited numbers, they would have to be very sparse across the island, so not high density or high volumes of troops, and they would also have to be dug in and basically hidden underground. And we could use reconnaissance drones to see if any Iranian forces ever landed on the island, and when they do, we could just have them pop up and try and wipe out whatever Iranian landing force just appeared, and then they go back into hiding in some basement somewhere. But if you did anything outside of that, like normal doctrinal operations for the Marines or the Army, the casualties and the losses vehicularly would probably start to mount pretty rapidly on those islands. So I hope that does address that the best I can, Fred, and a humongous thanks to you for support, and I hope this channel keep it running. And I hope that gave the best answer I could, at least, as to how that could be conducted successfully without taking extremely high losses. But I would say that's actually a pretty sound idea in general, because otherwise it would never be safe enough at this point for a ship to make it through the strait without going straight into a minefield. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
Also have here our last super chat of the segment, which goes to none other than Crispy, and a huge shout out to Crispy for always throwing in that traditional $20 support. And Crispy did not leave a comment, but we do appreciate it as always, good sir, for that Crispy $20 support. And Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta say a humongous thanks to you for the support, Crispy, and I hope this channel keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep it running. Folks like you who go over your way to support this channel help to make this thing possible for each and every single person who's watching right now. And I've got to say that we're entirely honored and greatly appreciative of folks like you having been around for so long and enjoying the channel and continuing to support it, so we can keep this kind of news coverage running each and every single day. And so a humongous thanks to you so much once again. I hope that has addressed that incredibly well. And with that, it is time for us to move on and into the rest of the news that we have from around the world, which really briefly, we are going to be moving on into the United States, as we've been able to hear a lot of important developments from Washington, D.C. and the Pentagon that are giving us an idea that war in the Middle East could be coming up at some point in the future. Not to say that every single day, but it looks like we're getting some indications that it could be coming back around. Moving us on into Washington, we were able to hear that a White House meeting was canceled today with the Speaker of the House and Senators, which is showing that the schedule was very quickly being cleared for reasons that were not explained. And we also were able to hear today that the House GOP leaders have abruptly canceled a vote on a resolution to limit the president's war powers in Iran, just as some members of that party were on the verge of losing the vote due to absences, according to CNN. Regardless of the facts of what CNN put out, the fact that they're stopping a vote on the resolution is something that is somewhat significant. Considering that we are coming up on the weekend, and with all the other indicators that we've been able to see inside the Middle East leading up to this point, it is appearing fairly likely that the United States is preparing for military operations that could be happening this weekend. Once again, it's just preparations, and this is not a guarantee that they will be conducting strikes this weekend. It looks to be good indicators, but we just don't know that for certain, and the president could change change his mind at any moment as usual, and we can hear that at the request of Pakistan, everything's been stopped again. We also were able to hear today in a hearing inside of the Senate, if I'm not mistaken, the United States Acting Secretary of the Navy has announced that the United States is actually stopping its $14 billion arms shipment to Taiwan because of the war in Iran and the position that we currently have with the Chinese. So this is now starting to confirm that the $14 billion arms sale to Taiwan is being used as a negotiating chip with the People's Republic of China about their position on the war in Iran and their support. So it looks like we might be willing, at least from what we're hearing right now, to possibly sell out Taiwan to be able to try and get out of the quagmire that we created with Iran and the war that we're currently involved in so far, which isn't really the greatest thing to hear, but
yeah. And also, who is the guy, by the way? Like the guy that was testifying? Well, who is it again?
I'll let you say it. I think you know his name.
Is it Hung Kao? Is that what we have?
Yeah, it's that guy.
It's Hung Kao. Hung Kao showing up, telling us the lowdown. Really though, this is not good. Like it's giving the signal to China that generally the U.S. isn't behind the whole situation. Yeah, there he is, right there, Honorable Hung Kao, as you can see right there. Got to add the honorable part. But you can see this is going to give the wrong message to China. This is going to basically show China that the U.S., like I was saying, is really not fully behind Taiwan right now. We're not sure if that's going to change because, of course, we did just see the U.S. reversed its decision on Poland withdrawing the troops. Now they're leaving the 5,000 troops there, and that has changed. Also, a little bit behind the scenes detail. The reason why that change was made is because there was about to be some opposition with the presidential allies to that whole decision, so they went ahead and preemptively just backed out of it. So I think the Taiwan situation might end up being similar. They might back out of this bad decision as well and simply approve the arms sale, because we should definitely not be using this as a bargaining chip. Because by using it as a bargaining chip, we're basically bargaining away Taiwan sovereignty to a large degree. Because if China feels that we're not going to back them up, that might just give them the green light to invade when they're ready.
Yeah, it certainly could, and it's not really a good look whatsoever for the U.S. strategic position because, like we were saying a while ago, using Taiwan as a negotiating chip to gain a short-term reprieve in the Middle East is not going to be good for our long-term advantage because we're basically selling ourselves out in East Asia to be able to fix our screw that we've created in the Middle East. So it's not really looking all too well at all at this moment, and it looks like the current administration is considering selling out the Taiwanese, at least from what we were able to hear in the Senate today. We've also been able to hear as well that there was a meeting today with the Southcom commander, General Francis Donovan, with the Secretary of Defense today, which appears to be showing us that there is some sort of talk on the Cuban situation at the moment, concerning that the USS Nimitz has just arrived within Southcom's area of responsibility. They might be considering some sort of a possible military action against Cuba at some point in the near future, in the midst of our ongoing war with Iran. So, making sure to really stretch ourselves thin here. We've also been able to hear that inside of the Strategic Petroleum Reserves, things are not looking too well. This last week is actually the largest draw on record from the Strategic Fuel Reserves since the beginning of the war in Ukraine in 2022, which was the largest draw that we had ever seen since the Strategic Petroleum Reserve had been created in 1982, which was the first year that it existed. We have seen that at some points in time there were some significant drains, like, for example, the beginning of the war on Iraq, which you could see, well, actually about right here, roughly. You can also see as well, let me see, what in the world would this one have been? Let's see, that's 2012. I can't really think of what the draw would have been for during 2012. But then during 2020, you could see that there was a significant growth of the petroleum reserve because of the pandemic. And then we saw that there was a significant drain because of the beginning of the war in Ukraine and the rediverting of supply routes that the Europeans were sending to Russia, and then they were having to divert them towards the United States and the Middle East. And now we're seeing, because of the war in Iran, we have seen a singular drain of 10 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in a single week. The week before, it was 8.6 million. And these are just the 2 weeks so far that we've seen European tankers arriving to pick up oil from the United States, since they can't pick it up from Europe. And this also should be showing a lot of people. I think this is an important one. Because I remember, folks, a lot of people back in the day when the war started, I said, the U.S. doesn't have the petroleum production figures to just be able to easily, deal with the loss of Middle Eastern oil. That is a significant supply shortage. And then many people wanted to say that it wasn't, because the United States is a net oil exporter and we produce more than we consume. If that was the case, why are we seeing such a significant drain of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is for strategic purposes? This is showing that we are well into eating into our daily production of crude oil, and we're having to literally tap into the reserves that we have sitting in the salt basins down in Louisiana to be able to try and find any oil for these ships that are coming in the port right now to get an export. So this isn't really a good situation whatsoever at the moment, and it is showing us that right now we are running into a pretty significant pickle. If this continues, we could see that the U.S.'s Strategic Oil Reserve runs out of oil physically by some point in mid-July, and we can start to see that critical fuel shortages begin to grip the nation across the entirety of the continent, and also the states of Alaska and Hawaii at some point here in the near future, and if this continues. So moving us on from that, and also I saw someone in the chat say, we are a net exporter, but net exporter in liquefied natural gas. You can't put that in the car. That's the huge disqualifier there, is that they say we're a net exporter of petroleum products, but petroleum products includes liquefied natural gas and crude oil. It isn't just about crude oil. The U.S. consumes 13.5 million barrels of crude oil every day just to drive the nation's interstates and roadways to get to work and back. The United States produces 13.5 million barrels of crude oil a day. So if you look at that, all of the crude oil that we produce in the United States is consumed by people just driving to and from work every day. Then you have to add in all of the industries in the country which consume another 7.5 million barrels of crude oil, and you also have to factor in the commercial sector as well, which consumes a pretty significant amount of crude as well. It's not as much as the industries, but it's still a decent amount. And once you add that all together, we consume 20 million barrels of crude oil every day, and we only produce 13.5 million barrels of crude daily. So we are not a net exporter of crude oil. We are a net exporter of liquefied natural gas. That means that we're running into a big problem right now because we're just consuming more oil than we're producing in the country, and now the Europeans are coming over, and they're also consuming a great deal of our oil to ship it back to Europe and be able to use as usable fuel over there. So, of course, it's a significant issue supply-wise, and it doesn't really look that good at the moment. But moving this on.
Also, you don't have to be so crude about it.
Oh, I wasn't. I was just telling
Man,
you.
it's a joke, man. It's a joke, man. The crude oil, crude, the whole joke.
Yeah. But I didn't know how to respond to that. I was like, I don't know what to do. It's like, well, I'm not being cruel, But anyways, with that, we are moving on into the Middle East, as we have also been able to hear that in Islamabad, Pakistan, we were able to hear the announcement that the Pakistan's army commander will not be traveling to Tehran tonight. This came after reports yesterday that he was the one who was going to be submitting the U.S.'s demands to the Islamic Republic of Iran here within the near future, which was today, and we've now been able to hear that his trip to Iran has been canceled, and he will no longer be making the voyage over there to be able to try and submit the U.S.'s demands. In the meantime, we were able to hear that weapons-grade uranium should not be sent abroad, according to Iranian sources, hardening Tehran's stance on one of the main U.S. demands at peace talks. Right now, the Islamic Republic of Iran is currently working on not giving up any enrichment capabilities or their nuclear research and development programs, and we've also been able to see that as a result of this, the Iranians are still hardlining and issued this directive today to make sure that none of the near weapons-grade uranium could be sent abroad. Also, by the way, folks, for anybody who's saying that Iran was never working on a nuclear weapon, why in the world did they issue a directive saying that near weapons-grade uranium shouldn't be sent abroad? If they were only doing, nuclear research and development for peaceful purposes, why do they have any near weapons-grade uranium in the country?
Yeah.
Exactly. Like that's,
I didn't know where to go with that one. I was like, yeah, I guess. I was like, sure.
But this is showing that they are certainly working on a nuclear weapon, because if they weren't working on a nuclear weapon, why the hell do they have near weapons grade uranium? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. But moving us on out of that, we have.
Now, we all agree that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. No, we all agree on this. But if we are sitting on the world's largest reserves of gas, then why are we paying $5 almost for our gas prices? Hopefully, with this large decrease in the oil prices, that we will start seeing that fluctuate or start moving into the United States gas prices. But we'll see. But that's all the news that we have for tonight, y'all. I hope y'all enjoyed the show. We did have a live call in tonight. I hope we answered your question. If we didn't, we will be back on either tomorrow evening if we have breaking news at 4:30 Eastern Standard Time, or we'll be back on for sure tomorrow night at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. Feel free to call in whenever we are on live air. Call lines will be off after we go off air. So if you are wanting to call in, please feel free to call in at anywhere from 10:30 to 11:30 or 12 at night. We usually on air between 11:30 and 12 at night, and we try to stay on. If y'all new to the channel, I really appreciate y'all dropping in and checking us out. If y'all are new, please drop a follow or a subscription, depending on what platform you're on. We're on Kick, YouTube, Rumble, and Twitch. So we have plenty of platforms for people to come over and watch us on. We look forward to all of our live call-ins, no matter if we have technical difficulties or if they have technical difficulties, no matter what call-in, no matter what. If there is a language barrier, then we can translate it through Google Translator. We have no problem doing that either. So if you do not speak English and you speak another language, please feel free to call in, because we will use Google Translator to translate what you're saying. But other than that, I hope y'all have a wonderful, God bless night. This is a Lone Wolf, and we're out. We had a great show tonight. Loved all y'all for the one calling that we had. Loved all y'all for dropping in and watching the show. We really appreciate y'all. Hopefully we can get back on track and actually start getting some more subscribers, start going up. But until then, we're just gonna sit here and keep on chilling with each other, and hopefully keep on getting views and keep on getting followers and subscribers. We are climbing the ladder, should I say? Let me rephrase that. We are climbing the ladder. We have breaking news. We have strikes going on in Belarus right now, in Libya. We do have strikes going on in Libya. This is breaking news. It's coming in right now as we speak. A strike just happened. A strike did just happen in Belarus, Libya. Prayers for the people that's there. Hopefully everybody gets. Hopefully no fatalities. Hopefully people gets out okay. Let's pray for the people that's here. That just witnessed that and just been involved in that. This needs to stop, y'all. Seriously, we need to go ahead and put the crack out on this. It's going to stop. Like I said in the Toasty show earlier, I actually put in, if they keep on doing this to take care of the problem, just go ahead and nuke the sites, and they can't use them. They can't even get in them. But just use tactical nuclear weapon on them. But anyways, breaking news: there was a strike just happened in Libya. Missiles was launched. Not for sure if it was a drone attack or if it was actual missile launch from Iran. I'm not for sure if this is Iran or what. This could be the Houthis too attacking Libya, Libya, shall I say. So we'll see. We will be keeping an eye on this, and we will be we might end up coming back on air because of this. Not for sure. It depends on how big it is and depends on what's going on. We will keep posted on this, and we will keep y'all posted on this. And should I say we will keep doing our research on this, and we will keep y'all posted on this. Should I say? My bad. Like I said, we will keep y'all up to date about what is going on. That is a massive strike. That's a lot of smoke. Massive strike happened in Belarus, or just moments ago, live on air. This has happened live on air, y'all. That was a massive strike. I know a building had to collapse on that. It looks like. Not for sure about what's going on or if any injuries. Let me see. Let me go here on Twitch to see if any news is coming out. No. Nobody's posted anything yet.